He used to think just coming home would be enough, that opening the same familiar door on Thanksgiving Day would bring hugs and warm voices. But after years of military service, what he heard instead was something that silenced his heart for good. Don't look away from the story full of heartache and unexpected truths hiding behind that once familiar door. Caleb used to be a Marine. 14 years in uniform, eating and sleeping on base, steel-toed boots, living in places no one wanted to be. He wasn't the type to talk much, and definitely not the type to brag about what he'd done. But there's one thing no one could deny. Caleb was the guy people counted on, especially when everything fell apart. Last year, during a mission on the outskirts of Raqqa, Syria, the convoy got ambushed. He doesn't really remember how loud the explosion was, just that the ground split open beneath him, his body launched up and slammed back down. The result? 3 severely damaged vertebrae, and just like that, his military career was over. Caleb was flown back to San Diego, home to one of the best physical rehab centers for wounded soldiers. He rented a ground-floor apartment in a quiet neighborhood. No noise, no questions, nobody knew who he was. Every morning, he practiced walking from the bedroom to the living room without clenching his teeth from the pain. Every night, he sat in front of a silent TV, the flickering screen washing over a face that showed nothing. No one checked in. No one had to. Caleb didn't blame them. He was the one who cut the ties first. Calls from his mom, texts from his dad, handwritten letters from his uncle in Nebraska. He ignored them all. He used to tell himself, if I'm not okay, I'm not dragging anyone down with me. But this year, near Thanksgiving, something shifted. Maybe it was the sudden drop in temperature. Maybe it was seeing a family hugging in the hospital parking lot after visiting hours. Or maybe it was just that, for the first time, he finished his dinner without feeling sick. He wasn't sure why, but Caleb wanted to go home. Savannah, where he grew up, where the house had a wide porch facing Magnolia Street. He missed the kitchen, with the slightly tilted tile floor, his mom calling from the backyard, the smell of holiday roast chicken, and his dad muttering about the heater being way too damn strong as he adjusted the thermostat. He didn't tell anyone he was coming, partly because he was afraid they'd say no, partly because he thought it'd be better as a surprise. Caleb pictured his mom going still, then pulling him into a tight hug, choking up as she said, "You really came back." He imagined everyone gathered around the dinner table, swapping old stories, hearing his dad rant about politics, listening to Zach, his younger brother, brag about the kids, and laughter. Caleb missed the sound of laughter in that house. He didn't have much to pack. Just an old military backpack, a few basic outfits, and the scarf his grandmother knitted before she passed. Caleb booked a bus ticket, overnight ride, fewer people, fewer conversations. When the driver asked where he was headed, he simply said, Savannah. The trip took over 30 hours. The seat was uncomfortable. The guy next to him snored. His back ached after 5 straight hours, but Caleb didn't complain. He was used to worse. Compared to everything he'd been through, this was just a scratch. On the afternoon of the holiday, the bus pulled into the final transfer station. Caleb stepped off, unrushed. The air in Savannah was gentler, with a faint scent of burning wood. The sun hadn't fully set, but the light had turned a pale gray. He called a ride service. The driver nodded, asked for the street name, didn't recognize him. The ride only lasted 20 minutes, but to Caleb, it felt like a year. Familiar roads came into view. The bait shop, the corner gas station, the old iron bridge. All still there, untouched. Only he had changed. The car stopped in front of the white 2-story house with the gray shingle roof and the faded wooden fence. The big oak tree in the front yard was still there. The trunk still etched with C+Z 1998, a childhood mark he and his brother had carved. Caleb stood there for a few seconds. He looked at the windows glowing with warm light, heard the faint clatter of pots and pans from the kitchen, caught a glimpse of someone walking past inside. His heart pounded harder than it ever had before a mission. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the doorbell. And then he stood still, waiting. Waiting for a door to open, waiting for something small, just enough to make him believe he still belonged here. The door creaked open slowly, like the person inside was still deciding whether or not to open it. Standing there was Richard, Caleb's father. He was tall, slightly hunched, with hair turned almost fully gray at the temples. His eyes scanned his son's face as if trying to make sure it was really him. It took a few seconds before he finally spoke. "Caleb?" His father's voice wasn't exactly joyful, just surprised. Then came a long silence. Caleb nodded. "Hey, Dad," a quiet beat. Then the soft shuffle of slippers echoed from inside the house. Diane, Caleb's mother, appeared in the doorway, still holding a dish towel. She froze when she saw her son. Her eyes widened, her lips moved, but no words came right away. "When did you get here?" she asked softly, then stepped forward and hugged him. It wasn't a tight embrace, not the tearful one Caleb had imagined, just enough to be called a hug. "A few hours ago, took the bus in from San Diego," he said, his voice low, like he didn't want to break whatever delicate thing was holding the moment together. Richard stepped back to make room. "Come on in, your mom's making dinner." Caleb crossed the threshold and looked around the house he used to belong to. The hardwood floors were still the same. The smell of roasted meat hung faintly in the air. But even from the living room, he noticed something that had clearly changed. The old family photo, the one of him, Zach, and their parents laughing under the oak tree, was no longer on the wall. In its place was a larger, newer frame. A photo of Zach standing next to his wife, Melissa, and their 2 young daughters. All 4 dressed in beige tones, smiling bright and polished. On the side table by the sofa, another frame. Zach holding a trophy for Outstanding Branch Manager, the bank's logo in the background. Caleb didn't say a word, just gave it a glance and kept walking, hearing the clink of knives and cutting boards from the kitchen. Zach turned at the sound of footsteps. The brothers' eyes met. Zach paused for a split second, then smiled. Polite, not quite joyful. "Oh, you're back. That's a surprise," Zach said, setting the knife down and wiping his hands on the apron. Melissa looked up from the pot of sauce and gave a small nod. The 2 little girls were watching cartoons in the living room, not even glancing back. Caleb gave a faint smile. "Hey, kid. How've you been? Haven't heard anything in a while." Still breathing, Zach let out a short, awkward laugh. "Yeah, I figured." Dinner was served at 6. The table was still the same long wooden one their dad had built years ago, but this time there were extra chairs. Caleb sat at the head, the seat that used to belong to his father, but Richard now sat next to Melissa, chatting with the older granddaughter about school. The meal began with a rushed prayer. His mother spoke fast, still pouring water as she mumbled through it. No one mentioned the fact that Caleb was back after nearly 6 years. Instead, the conversation revolved around Zach. "I just transferred departments. Now I'm managing the high-value client investment team," Zach said as he scooped rice onto his daughter's plate. "If all goes well, I'll be promoted to regional manager next year." "That's fantastic," Richard nodded approvingly. "That bank's doing real well. Steady job, long-term future. That's the way to go." Melissa's starting a small online shop too, selling home decor. She's got a real knack for it. The stuff she makes keeps selling out. "The older one's in 2nd grade now, right?" Diane asked, her eyes beaming as she looked at her granddaughter. "Yep, Mom. She's at a private school over in Westmore. It's close by and the curriculum's great. They even have a coding class for kids." Caleb ate slowly. His plate was full, but no one asked if he was hungry or if there was anything he couldn't eat. No one asked about the faint scar just above his collar or why he shifted in his seat every time the pain in his back crept in. He had expected someone might ask, "When did you get in?" or "What was it like over there?" Or at the very least, a simple, "You doing okay?" But no one did. Melissa talked about booking tickets for Disney World in the spring. Diane reminded Zach to send her pictures so she could start a new photo album. Richard brought up a piece of land near the river he said was showing investment potential. Caleb sat there like a decoration pulled out of storage just because company was over. After dinner, Diane started clearing the dishes. Zach helped, talking about a recent business trip as he worked. Caleb stood up, about to lend a hand. But Melissa said, "You can sit, you're just visiting." She didn't mean anything by it, but Caleb heard the line loud and clear. Just visiting. Not back, not home. He sat down again, looking around the dining room. The curtains had been changed. The picture in the corner was now a sleek landscape print, not the old photo of his grandparents. Even the tablecloth wasn't one of the hand-sewn ones his mom used to make. Caleb didn't know how long it had taken for everything to change, but it was clear. He wasn't part of that change. When everyone had finished cleaning up and the kids were getting sleepy, Diane stood up, looked at Caleb, and spoke softly, like she didn't want to stir anything. "You probably still remember your old room upstairs, huh?" Caleb nodded, though something sank in his chest. He hadn't expected much, just a mattress that wouldn't wreck his back and a little privacy. He grabbed his backpack and headed upstairs, down the narrow hallway still marked with the scratch he'd made back in middle school, messing around with a skateboard indoors. His hand touched the doorknob. Strangely familiar. But when he pushed the door open, the first thing he saw wasn't warm yellow light. It was a wall of boxes stacked waist-high. His room had become a storage space. The bed that used to sit by the window was gone. No pillows, no blankets. In their place were cardboard boxes labeled Christmas decor, Zach's old files, kitchen, donate. A dusty bookshelf leaned against the wall. His old desk was shoved to the side, one leg bent, covered with a sheet. He stood still, not surprised, just cold. Beneath his feet, the carpet was faded and slightly damp. No one had cleaned. No one had expected anyone to return. Every trace of Caleb had been moved, packed away, or buried under nameless clutter. He stepped back out of the room and quietly closed the door. Then he made his way down to the living room and found the long couch Zach had been sitting on earlier. He spread out a thin blanket. No pillow, no bedside lamp, just the low hum of the fridge and a dim light bleeding in from the hallway. Caleb lay on his side, curling up. The back that had once absorbed a blast was now bearing the weight of a stiff cushion, and the chill seeping through the doorframe. He couldn't shift positions easily. Every movement came with clenched teeth. But it wasn't the physical pain that woke him at 2 a.m., it was the whispering from upstairs. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He just wanted to grab a glass of water, maybe find another blanket. But as he passed the staircase, he heard his parents' voices drift down, soft, clear, and cautious. "I think we should tell Caleb," his mother's voice said quietly, heavy with hesitation. "The house? It's about to be sold." Caleb froze. Richard let out a sigh. "I'm not sure now's the right time. But if we don't tell him and he hears it from someone else, it won't make a difference. He doesn't live here. He chose to leave. This is his home too." "Diane," Richard cut in. "Zach's the one who's been here, helping out, taking care of things since I got sick. What about Caleb? 6 years, no calls, no check-ins, 1 card a year. He chose his path." His mother paused, then she said, quieter now, "But he's still our son." Richard answered flatly, "Zach's the one carrying this family. Caleb has the military, has his benefits. He's fine. Zach needs stability. He's got 2 kids. I'm not putting their future at risk because of feelings." Silence. Caleb didn't take another step. He gripped the stair rail, his palm tightening around it. The draft from the vent slipped through his shirt, colder than usual. This house had once been a place to return to. Now, it felt like a place that had been wounded. His father wasn't angry with him. He had simply erased him from the equation. Caleb wasn't part of the life plan anymore. Everything had been redistributed. Who lived where, who carried what, who got which piece. Zach had the family. Caleb had memories and a monthly check. He walked back to the sofa, clutching the glass of water he never drank. His shoulders trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of realizing he'd been erased, quietly, cleanly, and without anyone thinking they needed to say it out loud. The next morning, Caleb woke while it was still dark. The house was silent. No pots clanging, no kids stirring, no soft shuffle of his mom's slippers across the old wood floor. Just the dim light from the kitchen, and the soft hiss of wind outside the window. He sat up from the sofa, rubbing the dull ache in his lower back that had throbbed all night. No one asked how he slept. No one called him into the kitchen for breakfast like they used to. Caleb stood, folded the thin blanket, and laid it neatly across the back of the couch, as if no one had ever slept there. On the table, he left the old key, the rusted metal loop still attached to the faded plastic tag that read Room A, upstairs. Next to it sat a blank sheet of paper. He didn't write a word. No reason. No goodbye. The door opened with barely a sound. Caleb stepped outside, the cold wind slapping his face like a final reminder. You're fully awake now." The savannah sky was draped in thick clouds, and the dull, gray morning light made it feel like the world wasn't quite ready to wake up. He walked 3 blocks to the bus station. The house disappeared behind the trees, then vanished completely as the bus pulled away. Caleb sat alone in the back row, head resting in his hand, eyes fixed on the fogged-up window. He didn't speak a single word the whole ride back to San Diego. Childhood memories rolled in, one after another, sharp and clear like an old film in slow motion. He remembered kicking a ball around the front yard with Zach, how it bounced into the street, and how their dad scolded them for breaking a flower pot. He remembered his grandfather sitting on the porch cleaning a rifle, telling war stories, eyes shining every time he spoke about brotherhood. Caleb remembered the first time he put on his uniform, standing in front of the mirror. His mother hugged him from behind and whispered, "You've really grown up, haven't you?" Back then, he felt like he was something to be proud of. Not the polite kind of pride, but real pride. The kind in his dad's eyes when he looked at him. The kind that made his mom brag to everyone at church that her son was serving the country. But now, all of that had faded. Replaced. Zach was the one who had been there when their father got sick. The one who did the holiday shopping with their mom. The one who gave their parents 2 grandkids to brag about. Zach hadn't seen combat, but Zach had shown up. He didn't bring home medals, but he'd earned something else. A softer kind of recognition, the kind people reward with quiet trust and lasting presence. Caleb understood that, and he didn't blame them. But the wound was still there, silent, steady, just like the way everything had happened. When he got back to San Diego, Caleb didn't return to his old apartment. The lease had ended before he left. He dragged his backpack to a cheap motel near the beach, a place with single rooms, stiff beds, and walls so thin he could hear the hum of the neighbor's air conditioner through the night. No one was waiting for him. No plan. No purpose. Just a few personal items and a phone that almost never rang. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling empty. Like everything had shut down. No noise, no conflict, just a closed door. Around noon, Caleb opened his contacts. His finger paused over one name, Marcia Carter, the wife of Sergeant Carter, the squad mate who saved his life in Fallujah back in 2010. Carter died in an airstrike, leaving behind Marcia and their son, who was still in middle school at the time. At Carter's burial, Marcia had looked Caleb in the eye and said, "If there's ever a day you need a place to stand, just call me." Caleb never did. Until today. He didn't think long, just tapped the button. The phone rang 3 times, then clicked. Marcia's voice came through, low, a little rough around the edges. "Hello?" Caleb paused for a few seconds, then spoke slowly, as if afraid the words might dissolve before they reached her. "It's me, Caleb Walker." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Marcia breathed out, "Oh my God, it's really you? You're alive? Are you okay?" Caleb closed his eyes and gripped the phone. That simple question, "Are you okay?" was the one no one in his family had asked. His voice was rough when he answered, "Not exactly, but I'm trying to find my way back." Marcia didn't press for more. She just said, firm and clear, "Then come here." She didn't need to say anything else, just repeated once with certainty, "Come here." The next morning, Caleb caught a short train ride south of the city. Marcia lived in a quiet suburb called Vista Hills, where narrow winding streets ran between rows of single-story homes with red tile roofs. The station stop was right next to an old gas station, and just beyond that, the sandwich shop Marcia once told him Carter used to love. Caleb walked up the street, backpack over his shoulder, and stopped in front of house number 812. Pale yellow walls, a front yard full of lavender and cacti, and a small wooden sign hanging outside the window. Carter family since 1993. Marcia opened the door before he could knock. She looked just the same, hair pulled back neatly, wearing a long-sleeved sweater, her face tired but her eyes warm, unguarded. "I knew you wouldn't call unless it was the last stop," she said, and pulled him inside like someone finally welcoming family home. Inside, dinner was halfway done, the smell of roasted chicken and cornbread in the air, with a faint minty scent from the candle flickering on the table. 2 kids peeked around the corner from the living room. The curly-haired girl was the first to shout, "Uncle C?" Caleb stopped in his tracks. The boy, maybe 15, nodded like he was confirming it. She's right, it's really you. I'm Jordan, the boy said, and that's Eliza. Eliza ran up and held out her hand. I still have the patch you sent. The color hasn't even faded. Caleb laughed, the first real laugh in weeks. Didn't think you'd still remember that. I didn't forget. Jordan said, then ran to his room and came back with a small plastic box. Inside was a letter, a cloth patch with the unit insignia, and a silver coin. I read the letter every Veterans Day, Eliza said. Aunt Marcia says you're a good man. That night's dinner had no wine, no pressed linens with fancy patterns, but there were the clinks of forks and spoons, the hum of stories being told, and soft laughter that trickled from the far end of the table. Caleb didn't talk much, but whenever he did, the kids listened like he was reading them a fairy tale. Marcia filled his bowl with soup a second time. Eat up, you're thinner than I expected. He nodded, smiling faintly. When dinner was over, Marcia did the dishes while Caleb wiped the table. She pointed down the hallway. Carter's old room's still empty. If you don't mind a little dust? Caleb paused for a second, then nodded. I don't mind. The room was small, with pale blue walls and a window that looked out onto the backyard. A single bed, a desk, a few old books, and a bedside lamp. Nothing was new, but nothing felt fake. Caleb set his backpack down on the floor and sat on the bed. The mattress creaked softly, but it was more comfortable than anything he'd slept on in years. The next morning, there was a knock on the door. You up? Jordan called. We're gonna set up a tent in the backyard. Can you help? Caleb pulled on a t-shirt and stepped outside. The three of them were tangled up in tent poles, ropes, and a confusing instruction sheet. He took the map, furrowed his brow, then flipped it upside down. First thing, he said, you gotta figure out where the wind's coming from. Otherwise, this thing's gonna fly away on you. Eliza laughed. You sound like a pro. Caleb shrugged. I only lived in tents for 10 years. By noon, they'd finished setting up a tent that would pass inspection. Jordan asked Caleb to show him how to read a compass. Eliza wanted to know how to treat a wound. Caleb didn't lecture. He just spoke slowly, weaving in little stories. Once I had to patch up a teammate with a torn piece of my own shirt. It was all I had, but he made it. Eliza was quiet for a moment, then asked, Were you scared? Caleb answered gently, Yeah. But you still do it, scared or not. The days that followed were quiet. Marcia didn't pry, didn't press him to talk. She just made tea, asked what he felt like eating, and now and then mentioned Carter like he was still somewhere in the house, just in the next room, just out of sight. One evening, as Caleb sat watching TV with the kids, Marcia called softly from the kitchen. You know, the kids say you're what's left of Carter. Caleb turned his head. You mean I remind them of him? Marcia shook her head. No, I mean the feeling of safety he used to bring with him. Caleb didn't say anything after that. But that night, he slept better than he had since leaving the service. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like an extra piece from a life that had moved on without him. He wasn't the leftover part of an old family. He was a piece slowly locking into place within a new one. Quiet, simple, without demands, but warm enough to stay. Caleb hadn't planned to stay long. When he first agreed to spend a few nights at Marcia's, he figured he'd be gone by the end of the week. But the days passed, then weeks followed, and still he hadn't stepped beyond the gray wooden gate out front. One early morning, while making coffee and walking the perimeter of the house, he noticed the side awning out back had started to sag. The wood was splitting, soft with rot from years of weather. Marcia said, I meant to call someone to fix that. Just haven't gotten around to it. Caleb didn't say a word. That afternoon, he climbed up onto the roof. It wasn't heavy work, just patient work. Hand-sawing, replacing the old planks, setting new nails, bracing it with a fresh beam. Sometimes the breeze hit his neck just right and his back flared with pain. But Caleb didn't stop. 3 days later, the roof no longer leaked. His hands were dusty, sweat soaked through his shirt, but inside he felt something solid. He could still do something that mattered. Saturday afternoon, as Caleb was putting tools away behind the house, a man in his 60s stepped into the yard through the side gate. Sun-worn face, faded jeans, a backwards ball cap. You Caleb? Caleb nodded. Yeah, Marcia told me about you. I'm Hank. Live down at the end of the street. I teach the neighborhood kids stuff, mechanics, cars, practical things. Every now and then I run them through some survival basics too. Caleb stayed quiet. Word is you were a Marine? Another nod. Want to show the kids a few things? Just a half day. They need to hear it from someone real, not just out of a book. Caleb looked at him. They'd never met. No small talk. No sugarcoating. But that sentence, it carried something he hadn't heard in a long time. Someone needed him. I'm not a teacher, he said. Even better, Hank grinned. They're sick of teachers. The next week, Caleb had somewhere to be every Wednesday and Friday morning. A repurposed old shed served as a makeshift classroom. 4 or 5 students. The youngest was 13, the oldest 17. Their eyes lit up when he held out a map and asked, "If you're lost in the woods with just a watch and a needle, what do you do first?" At first, they didn't know how to answer. But when Caleb told them about the time he and his squad got lost in the desert, how they used the sun's shadow to find direction and rationed water down to shared sips, they couldn't look away. He taught them how to pitch a tent, splint a broken arm with a button-up shirt, and how to stay calm when panic hits. No theory, just the kind of lessons you only learn through blood and survival. The pay wasn't much, just enough to fill up Marcia's old pickup and grab a few boxed lunches, but it gave him somewhere to go, a reason to wake up early, a group of people waiting for him to knock on the door. One afternoon, as Caleb sat in the truck parked in the driveway, Eliza tapped on the window. In her hands was a simple, spiral-bound packet of paper. "I wrote this for school," she said. "The teacher told us to pick a hero to write about. I picked you." Caleb looked at her and gave a crooked smile. "Heroes are the ones who can fly, right?" Eliza shook her head. "No, heroes are the ones who come back, even when they're hurt." He took the paper from her. Didn't read it right away. But that night, after everyone had gone to bed, he sat in the truck and turned on the dome light. The title on the first page read, "My hero is Uncle C." And the opening line said, "He used to fight enemies on a battlefield. Now he fights memories, and still gets up every morning to help someone else." Caleb folded the paper and set it on the passenger seat. His hand rested on the steering wheel, but he didn't start the engine. He just sat there, staring out the window. Outside were the still shadows of trees and the faint, distant glow of streetlights. He didn't need to say anything, didn't need to cry. He just sat for a long time and realized, truly realized, that sometimes family isn't the place you're born into. It's the place that opens the door for you, even when you come empty-handed, even when you didn't call ahead, even when nothing was promised. And places like that, they're rare, but they're real. Caleb used to believe his life had ended the day he took off the uniform, that without the battlefield, without the medals, without a home to return to, there was no reason left to keep going. But the truth was, what he lost wasn't his worth, just the place that once saw it. He found himself again, not through glory, not through anyone else's approval, but through small things. Fixing a sagging roof, teaching a kid how to stay calm when they're lost, quietly stitching his own heart back together by showing up in the lives of others. And then he understood. Being needed doesn't mean becoming someone great. Sometimes just being there, at the right moment, in the right way, is enough. We often cling to what we've lost, forgetting that sometimes our true worth is seen most clearly in the eyes of those willing to welcome us back. No conditions attached. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away from a place you thought was home? Have you ever felt like you didn't belong in your own family? If you've been through something like Caleb, or if you're still on the path to finding your own worth, share your story with us in the comments. And if this story made you feel seen, understood, or simply less alone, don't forget to subscribe to Family Drama for more honest, deeply human journeys like this one. Thank you for staying with us to the end.